from Bishop Deely, and he'd like to do that second question.
Okay. So Bishop Deely asked about the inclusion of adults in the charter. That was not what the National Review Board was recommending. We recognize that the charter should be limited exclusively to children and young people. What we were trying to get across is that there needs to be some kind of code of conduct or mechanism that deals with misconduct dealing with adults, but we were not suggesting in any way that that be part of the charter, because that would be moving the charter in a direction that it's not intended to. So I just want to address that second question that Bishop Deely raised.
Bishop Evans, followed by Bishop Doherty.
Doctor, we've been hearing a lot about negligence on the part of bishops. However, was any thought given to the fact that many bishops and religious superiors acted according to the best practices of the day? Now, we might be talking the 60s, 70s, early 80s. Religious order, religious superiors, bishops, they followed the advice of therapy centers. Some of them were told to send the men back into ministry as part of ongoing therapy. Even so-called confidentiality agreements, I think they were all the rage. All lawyers entered into them. And were they to protect the victim and the family as well as the diocese? I think it's a little more complex. So when we talk about so many bishops being negligent, I think there's a whole nother area that has not been looked into, and I hope serious consideration will be given to recognizing many bishops and superiors, and I would say almost everyone did the best they could according to the best lights of that time.
Yeah, and I thank you for that point, yes. We have discussed that several times, and I think the issue becomes that bishops did act according to the advice of experts, and you did what experts told you to do. What we find, though, that is oftentimes that priest who was resent to ministry then continued to abuse subsequently, and there wasn't necessarily consequences on the subsequent abuses that occurred, even though the advice initially was followed. So we have talked about that.
Okay, Bishop Doherty, followed by Archbishop Laurie.
Good morning, and thank you for the microphone. I have my hat on as the chairman for the Committee for the Protection of Children, just to make a couple of comments addressed to what Archbishop Cordileone and Bishop Beegler had said. You know, overall, in the concern for who gets on a list that gets published, the whole weight of that does not have to fall on your diocesan review board. In our area, the Child Protective Services or the police are notified first if it's a current problem, and if it's a historic problem, we still call them, because even though an offense may have occurred 10, 15 years ago and is beyond the statute of limitations, people in those offices may have heard this name previously and be able to connect the dots and protect victims in the present day. So police and child protective services are great assist. Once they've made a designation that somebody has actually committed a crime, it's a little easier to put them on a list. The other thing that I would, with so many of the things that we do, they do impinge on other dioceses, and I know we're very sensitive to that. When I was a pastor of whatever parish I was pastor of, before I would do anything really different, I would contact the pastors in the area to see if this would put pressure on them. When we set up boards or more intensive purposes in our own diocese, that's commendable, and I know a lot of us have done that, but I hope we also check with the other bishops in our province, because it may be helpful to get their advice, but it also may create a problem as people then will look at the surrounding diocese as not being diligent enough. So there's that balance that we're never going to fully solve, but we should be aware of.
Archbishop Laurie, followed by Bishop Eprogny.
Doctor, thank you very much for your presentation. A comment and two brief questions. Baltimore published its names back in 2002, so we've had them out a long time. But there are lists and there are lists. So one of the things I note about what my predecessors have done and what I'm continuing to do is that we put out a lot of information about each of the accused. including when we got the allegation and when we acted on it, as well as where they were assigned. So people know a little bit more than usual. So I just want to mention that. Two questions. Have you reviewed the standards of conduct for bishops? And if so, do you think they are adequate?
We have not reviewed those.
Okay, because that goes well beyond the statement of Episcopal accountability. And secondly, in your discussions in the NRB, do you talk also about the collaboration of bishops and religious order superiors? Because that's also an area where I think there could be some strengthening of relationships.
We have talked about that, and that was actually also one of the recommendations during the charter revision process, that collaboration be strengthened and be more substantive. So we have talked about that, and we continue to talk about that. We're trying to work more closely with the major superiors of men to see how we can collaborate and move something like that forward in a more substantive way.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bishop Brockie, followed by Bishop McKnight.
First of all, I want to thank you for the clarification regarding the point raised by Bishop Deely, and in that regard, I have a suggestion that I'd like to offer to my brother bishops. In the Diocese of Springfield in Illinois, we have two separate panels that review these different kinds of allegations. There's a special panel for clergy misconduct, for adult misconduct and financial misconduct that was set up by my predecessor, Archbishop George Lucas, that is separate from the review board. I have found that to be very helpful. There's a separate independent hotline that goes to the special panel. It's headed by a former federal prosecutor. There are different sets of questions for both groups. With sexual misconduct with minors, when you're dealing with financial misconduct or financial misappropriation, it's a whole separate different set of questions and expertise for the members of the panel, and looking at financial audits versus the allegation of sexual misconduct. Now, I appreciate that in some smaller dioceses that may be difficult to have two separate panels, but Springfield is not that big, and we've been able to staff two very competent panels with very professional people on that. So I just offer that as a recommendation, that a way of still getting lay involvement in that, but keeping it separate from your review board. With regard to the publication of lists and putting names on a list, one of the difficulties I have found is that usually, what I've been asked to do, for example, is just there's two categories, credible and not credible. And in going through them, I found that there's more nuance than that. So that, for example, there would be someone who 20 years ago made an allegation and never followed up with the review board. And so the review board said, well, we couldn't come to any decision on this. And so for me now, 20 years later, I'm being asked, well, is this credible or not? Well, if it was inconclusive 20 years ago, it's still inconclusive, and I hesitate to come down on one side or the other. So, I mean, you may have categories like credible, not credible, or inconclusive. So, yeah, I think if we're going to be publishing information, sometimes we have to make those nuances as well so people can appreciate those differences. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bishop McKnight, followed by Archbishop Sheehan.
Thank you, Doctor. It's good to see you again. The fundamental role we have as bishops is to preserve the apostolic communion of the Church. In your presentation, you mentioned several times issues of trust, issues of credibility between the laity here in the United States and the clergy. And I thank you for the proposals that you have submitted from the NRB that we have at our places, which I would encourage our bishops not to dismiss outright, even if currently they may not go along with the current code of canon law, because this issue of the communion of the Church is vital. It's important. The second thing I would like to ask you, as a man that I have gotten to know while working at the Conference of Bishops, a faithful man, a very competent man, a very concerned man, I would like to know what you would like us to do. What one thing? Yesterday, as a new bishop, when I heard what everybody else heard at the beginning of the meeting, it struck me. I was heartbroken to hear that the Holy See doesn't trust us. And we first have to ask why. What are we doing ourselves to have that kind of reaction? But I want to hear primarily from you as a member of the baptized. What one thing do you want us as bishops in the United States to do to preserve the communion of the church? Thank you.
I would say to decisively act on this issue and to continue to move it forward. Because if that does not happen, I fear for the future of our church. So the decisive action and to continue to move this forward, not to stagnate it, not to slow it down, but continue in the direction that has begun.
Okay, Archbishop Sheehan, followed by Archbishop Blair.
Thank you. Several things that I'd like to say. Some people have been saying, well, Catholics shouldn't go to Mass anymore because, you know, the bad priest did these things. Well, we don't go to Mass because every priest and bishop is good. We go to Mass because we think that Jesus Christ established the Roman Catholic Church 2,000 years ago and put the result of of St. Peter and the apostles and their successors, the bishops, and the Holy Father and the bishops today. So we go to Mass because we want to receive the body and blood of Jesus, and not because us guys are all perfect, but rather it's our Lord Jesus Christ that we receive. So we should continue to encourage our people to be faithful to Mass despite the difficulties. Now, I would say that to put it into context, I think there's maybe 3 reasons that I would give for the scandals. First of all, celibacy isn't always easy. Secondly, in the 1960s, the collapse of sexual morality happened in our country and around the world, and it very much hurt the dignity of the way that we have our moral lives lived. And certainly the sexual revolution had a big impact, not only on the other parts of society, but the church as well. And certainly then some of the priests and lay people accepted that sexual revolution, and they got very much into trouble. And then the third thing, after Vatican II, some priests and lay people began to get kind of wobbly on their faith and morals, and they gave up praying, they gave up confession, and some of these priests fell into mortal sin and, of course, into the terrible abuse of minors. That's not in any way trying to justify. It's just the conditions, the situation that brought about the problems that we faced. And certainly we have now turned a corner. And we've turned a corner. In 1993, when I went to Santa Fe, I had to throw out 25 bad priests and put into effect immediately zero tolerance. The stuff that we did in 2002, I already started it in Santa Fe in 1993, and as a result, cleaned it up. But we've had one case since that time, and I was the one that reported it to the police. He went to prison for 2 years, and since that time, no other problems. Most of this stuff has happened 50 years ago, 40 years, 30 years, some 20 years. It's decades where it happened, and certainly we have changed the corner. We've turned the corner. We all have zero tolerance, and we certainly want to help the victims of sexual abuse by clergy. A terrible, terrible thing. We want to help the victims in every possible way. And so we are in better shape now, brothers, and we need to keep strong in our moral teaching, faithful to the teachings of the church, encouraging our priests to pray and to receive the sacraments. And so certainly we want to ask God to help us so that these terrible things will never, ever happen again.
Thank you. Any comments? Or just fine. Archbishop Blair, followed by Cardinal Wuerl.
Yes, thank you, Doctor. I don't have a specific question for you, but just a concern that comes to my mind when we start to talk about misconduct with adults, particularly sexual misconduct. First of all, I think in our society today, the presumption is that anything involving a priest is an abuse of power, and that mutual consent becomes problematic in that situation. I would also concede, certainly, that there may be an instance where a priest who's very repentant of having done something like this is not disqualified permanently from ministry. But here's my grave concern, is that if we do have a situation where a priest is deeply troubled, we come to that conclusion, or that they remain a serious risk, then we come back to 2002 about the whole question of laicization. And we know that at that time there was great resistance in many quarters to laicization. A life of prayer and penance was created basically for extreme old age or extreme infirmity. And we know that it evolved to include a lot of people who were not in extreme age or infirmity. And, the liability for the diocese, or even the situation of a priest who might be a risk, who is relatively young, what do we do? I think this will really involve a close collaboration and revisiting of this whole question with the Holy See, because how do we handle this? What risk is it for the people if a person remains in ministry in certain circumstances?
Right. Yeah, and I think, Bishop, that gets to an important point about safety plans. And what do safety plans entail, and how are those safety plans implemented in a way that allows for monitoring not on a irregular basis, but on a fairly regular basis, as a potential way in which to deal with the issue that you talk about. So I think that's an area that needs further discussion and further elaboration in terms of what is a safety plan, what does monitoring mean. It's not just once a month or whatever, but it has to be something substantive that allows the bishop in the diocese and the people in the diocese to have some confidence that this individual is not going to be able to go out and abuse again. But you make a very important point that needs further discussion and deliberation.
Thank you.
Cardinal Wuerl, followed by Bishop Troutman.
Thank you, Your Eminence. And Dr. Cesario, thank you. Thank you for such a comprehensive presentation that has followed in the line of what you've been bringing to us so many times in the past. I'm thinking back to 2002 when we had that horrendous meeting because of the horrendous material we were dealing with. And I remember Pope, now St. John Paul II, saying this was a moment of purification. This was a time to begin a profound purification, and not just personal, but institutional. That intervention that more or less set the frame of reference for what we set out to do, I think has to be with us today. And I heard you say that. And yesterday, so many of the people who spoke to us of that spiritual purification in the life of the church. We heard earlier today an intervention that spoke about the role of the Spirit empowering us. One of the things that I just wanted to compliment your presentation on were your ability to weave in so many of the factors, each one of which requires a lot of attention, and it's not just an administrative procedure. You touched on transparency, and what what does that mean as we move forward? Transparency on the level of a diocese, but transparency on the level of all of us working together. I think that's going to be a very significant factor. We've come a long way since 2002, but we still have some way to go. The idea of accountability and taking the responsibility personally, but also institutionally, for breakdowns, for failures. All of that is something that in your presentation, I think you wove very well into the context of a much larger picture, and that is this the synodality, the walking together. Yesterday was a visible example, a beautiful spiritual example of walking together. We had lay people, we had religious, we had priests, we had bishops, all of us addressing this. But I think one of the things that perhaps brought some cohesion, at least for me, in all those elements you touched on and what we heard yesterday as well, was the constant theme of our unity, that we are a communion, we're a church rooted in our faith, rooted in the Spirit, and somehow that community, that communion, that unity centered in Peter and flowing from the work of all of us, always with and never without, but also experiencing our own responsibility, seems to me to be a pathway forward, as you've pointed out. Thank you for taking all of those themes and weaving them together, weaving them in light of what we heard yesterday. I do think part of purification is what you suggested. Sometimes we simply have to take personal responsibility, and we simply have to say, this needs to be done. Institutionally, it's easier. Personally, it's where that purification has to be a part of the entire process. Thank you so very much for what you presented.
Thank you, Your Eminence.
Bishop Troutman, followed by Cardinal O'Malley.
Thank you, Doctor, for your comments, which have produced a great discussion here among the bishops. I'd like to make 3 points. The sex abuse crisis is part of original sin, and we can't forget this. Never going to be stomped out completely. It's found in families, it's found in other faith traditions, and we should not be so naive as to accept every government report, every Attorney General report as being totally accurate or honest. And I would not cite the Philadelphia Inquirer or the Boston Globe as sources of confident information.
Thank you. You're correct, Bishop. It is a societal problem. And the statistics indicate that either 1 in 10 adult males in the United States perpetrate sexual abuse of minors, or 1 in 5. So it is certainly a societal problem. It is not a uniquely Catholic problem. And we don't mirror in any greater numbers what is out there in society. So absolutely, you're correct.
Cardinal O'Malley, followed by Bishop Braxton.
I just want to join my voice to those who are saying how important it is that we come out of this meeting with some very concrete action so that people will not be convinced that the church is incapable of governing itself. When mistakes are made in one diocese in the country, it affects all of us. And for that reason, I'm very anxious to see what can be done with the audit process so that it will truly be a very demanding audit that will reveal the real situations of our dioceses. In the past, so often, I think the audit has lulled people into a false sense of security. They get great marks on the audit, and the next thing you know, there's a grand jury investigation pointing out all of the terrible things that took place there and that were not addressed. We certainly need a fulsome discussion in our Conference of Bishops about adult misconduct and how to deal with that. But I wonder if now is not the time for us to change the definition of vulnerable adult which we have been using the definition, I think it's in canon law, that it's someone who does not have the continual use of reason. I think we need to extend that to adults who can be the victims of abuse of power and include that also in the remit of the National Review Board.
Thank you.
Bishop Braxton.
I appreciate your presentation very much.
Thank you.
Doctor, it is distressing in some ways, to say the least. We are focused in a special way now because of the emergence of the fact that bishops have not only mishandled this terrible reality, sin, scandal, and crime, but some bishops have themselves been a part of it. And you have stated that it is so important that some action be taken, and others have said it's important that we at least discuss the question of bishops and the way to create greater responsibility and accountability for bishops. I would simply like to remind us all of something we all know. It's our priests who are still the most likely to be accused. And I give retreats for priests in various parts of the country, and so I'm in contact with a fairly large number of priests, and I hear some voices saying, well, now the bishops are concerned about themselves, and so they're going to take the matters more seriously, but not as concerned about priests, especially those priests who are accused of misconduct more currently in recent years, but accusations that date back 20, 30 years ago. And those priests who are accused, for whom there is no sufficient evidence to say it is credible or substantial, but the accuser goes to the media. And so now that priest, who the bishop himself doesn't think there's credible, substantial evidence, and the review board does not think so either, still their name and their story is on the front page of the local secular newspaper. I think that while we must do all we can to go forward with the issues addressing the accountability of bishops for their misdeeds or mishandling, we must not lose sight of the fact that the day-to-day minister in our parishes, in large numbers all over the diocese, all over the country, are parish priests. And many of them feel very, very vulnerable and maybe even neglected, or they may feel that we don't care as much about them when they are innocent and accused, or if some very, very small misdeed in terms of a minor boundary violation that doesn't rise to the level of misconduct. And so I just would like to make sure we keep the priests before us, reminding ourselves, of course, that we are priests amongst them, but the priests that we serve are sometimes very sensitive, very concerned, very vulnerable. Thank you.
Yes, I think you bring an important point, Bishop, in terms of making sure that our priests get the support that they need, both from you as bishops, but also from the laity as well. So that's an important aspect of this whole question.
Bishop Ricken is the final, and we have Bishop Ricken.
I just wanted to say that in listening to victims of sexual abuse by clergy, I've noticed that it's very, very hard for them to find a path to healing. Forgiveness is one of the ways, but it's very hard for them to forgive. And I think the healing component of this problem is something that we would do well to take up. I know we have so much on our agenda, but far more than programs or the vigilance we need to carry forward about ourselves and others in the church, I think we would do well to begin having conversations with people in the area of spiritual direction, psychologists, people who offer post-traumatic counseling of one kind or another. The path toward healing seems to be extremely difficult to find. And so this journey would be something that Pope Francis talks about accompaniment I think we would do well as a church somehow to find paths toward healing for these people who their innocence has been taken, their identity has been lost, and somehow we have to help them to get to recovery and restoration of lost innocence. And so I would really been praying about this, if we can find ways to help them as a whole church, all of us, working together to really accompany and feel true empathy with these people who have been victimized. And as somebody said earlier, I think you said yourself too, Doctor, this is a human and a societal problem, and there's brokenness of this kind all over the place. We have to deal with what we've caused, and we should do it with greater clarity and alacrity and zeal. But this is a problem that has many, many layers and ripples to it. And the victims of clergy sexual abuse, their families are devastated by this.
Yeah.
So that's another area that we really need to find ways to help the church to heal so that we can be of service to the world.
Thank you, Bishop. And I think it's important is that the healing and the reconciliation has to come on the terms of the victim himself or herself. It cannot be imposed on them. And the accompaniment is really the accompaniment of seeing where they are and what level of reconciliation and what level of forgiveness they're ready to render forward. So I think that's very, very important.
Thank you, Dr. Cesario. Obviously, your report was very fine and gave rise to a whole lot of discussion and issues, so we thank you. God bless you in your ongoing work. Thanks. Where am I? I guess up here. Brothers, so that we may have ample time to process amendments, we need to turn to an item unrelated to the crisis, which may seem to be we should continue on, but we're going to take this because of the amendments. Namely, we want to deal with the pastoral letter against racism. At this time, we will hear a preliminary presentation of the action item, which is amendable. Following the chairman's remarks, there will be an opportunity to ask questions of clarification only. Since we are not speaking in favor or against, please use a yellow card to be recognized if you do have questions of clarification. We will have the debate and the vote on this item tomorrow. Amendments are due today at 6 p.m. in the trays outside of this meeting room. And now we welcome for a preliminary presentation Archbishop Gustavo Garcia and Bishop Shelton Fabre, Committee on Cultural Diversity in the Church, for the formal statement, Open Wide Our Hearts, the Enduring Call to Love, a Pastoral Letter Against Racism.
Brothers, we are here to present action item number 3, the approval of Open Wide Our Hearts, the Enduring Call to Love, a Pastoral Letter Against Racism. The documentation in front of you includes background, information on the genesis of this important and highly collaborative project that has been taking several years in the making. You should also have with you the table with the modifications approved by the committee. Thank you, Cardinal, for allowing us to do this introduction. To put things in perspective, 4 years ago, now 2014, the Committee on Cultural Diversity in the Church, at the request of the Subcommittee on African American Affairs, brought to the attention of the Committee on Priorities and Plans the imperious need for the U.S. Catholic bishops to address the scourge of racism in the face of growing social upheaval, harmful rhetoric, and violent incidents with racial overtones. The committee sought authorization to create a conference-wide statement as part of our next strategic plan. In November of 2016, Archbishop Wilton Gregory, in his report to the General Assembly on behalf of the Task Force on Peace, in our communities strongly endorsed the idea and underscored the urgency of such statement to provide pastoral guidance to the faithful and other people of goodwill. With the approval of the USCCB 2017-2020 strategic plan, the Committee on Cultural Diversity in the Church was charged with leading the process of drafting this pastoral letter, which became just one piece, albeit an important one, of the broader effort by the Bishops' Conference to combat racism. As I stated earlier, the next was produced through a highly collaborative process that included input from every standing committee of the conference. I want to thank all of you, particularly the chairman and designated liaisons of all the collaborating committees, for your hard work and dedication to this project, your insights, and the countless hours dedicated to review of the successive drafts that followed. Thank you also to the many consultants and staff that have contributed to this project from beginning to end and made it possible for us to fulfill our commitment to bring this text before you at this meeting. In a special way, I want to thank Bishop Shelton Fabb, up until now chairman of the Subcommittee on African American Affairs, who was designated by the Cultural Diversity in the Church early on in this process as the lead bishop for this task. He has deftly shepherded this document from inception to completion, and if approved, will oversee the initial implementation of the pastoral letter's vision as chairman of the Ad Hoc Committee Against Racism. Now, Bishop Fabb will make few remarks about the text of the pastoral letter.
Thank you, Archbishop Gustavo. Good morning, my brother bishops. As Archbishop Gustavo just described, the text you have in front of you is the result of an intense and prolonged collaboration among many of us. As a result, the text is a true expression of our collegiality. Open wide our hearts conveys the bishop's grave concern about the rise in racist expressions in American society, in public discourse, on social media, and as they affect our institutions and shape public policy. The statement condemns racism, but also seeks to raise awareness of its impact on people and on communities, as well as to assist pastors, educators, families, and individuals in confronting racism. The message acknowledges progress in the fight against the evil of racism in our country since we last addressed this topic, but also encourages honest self-reflection by individuals and by the church. The text addresses racism in a broad sense as it affects various groups and ethnicities in the United States. However, it also pays special attention to the experiences of Native Americans, African Americans, Hispanics, and immigrant groups to draw important lessons from some of the most painful examples, historical or contemporary, of racism in our country. The pastoral letter is written in the style of a Pauline exhortation, highlighting Catholic teaching on the human person as the image of God, and calling individuals and communities to conversion and action. It seeks to engage everyone, those who have held racist thoughts or committed racist acts, and those who have felt the sting of racism, church leaders and everyday people, individuals and social groups and structures, Catholics and all people of goodwill. It offers general ideas, but also practical suggestions for actions for individuals, families, dioceses, clergy formation programs, and Catholic organizations. It does convey, I hope in no unclear terms, both the Church's remorse for any role her members may have had, presently or in the past, in the commission of racist acts or the spread of racist attitudes, and the bishop's commitment and determination to combat the scourge of racism in the hearts and minds of the faithful in our own church communities and in the structures of society. In addition to the exhaustive process of review by way of the committee structure, individual members also had the opportunity to review the text one more time leading up to this plenary assembly. A few of you submitted final comments and suggested modifications. You have in front of you on the table the list of modifications accepted by the committee. As a final note, I also want to draw your attention to the fact that the pastoral letter will provide a foundation for the work of the Ad Hoc Committee Against Racism in future years. Judging by the consultations the Ad Hoc Committee has conducted so far, I would also like to add that the initiative has attracted much interest and great anticipation, not only among our people, but also in the ecumenical community. For these reasons, I ask for your support in favor of the statement, "Open wide our hearts, the enduring call to love, a pastoral letter against racism." And now, Your Eminence, if it is your desire, Archbishop Gustavo and I are open to any questions or comments at this time.
These are questions for clarification, brothers, at the presentation of this letter. Anyone have a card that's... Bishop Nestow.
I know this is tomorrow or later we'll have the chance to speak in favor. But it is a question regarding the one section on being open to encounter and new relationships. I think it's a very important section. And just to kind of give an example, because within the Diocese of Richmond, of course, is where Charlottesville is located, and which just had the anniversary not too many months ago regarding the protests there and then the death of Heather Heyer, which has precipitated a great deal of concern in terms of not only the diocese, but the parishes located there, and some of them very much affected by it. Now, at Easter time, at Good Friday, during Holy Week, there was, after the Holy Good Friday services, I was pinged on my telephone, cell phone, and it was a little report in the news about in front of one of our parishes was an effigy was hung with a noose in front of the parish. And this was getting kind of news press there in terms of the articles. And a great concern about what that was about. And there was a African-American family who was visiting the church Good Friday and saw this, and then very upset by it, and of course called the police and called the news outlets as well. And so this was the news. We had to look and inquire on that pretty quickly, and as it turned out, that there was a really clear misunderstanding, because we had the Hispanic community also having a Good Friday celebration and a living stations. And this was an image of Judas that was meant for part of that. And so there was this misunderstanding within different ethnic groups within the same parish. And it did require a bit of conversation and understanding between the two. We did follow up with that so that there would be an understanding about what kind of message might be sent, even with a goodwill and a desire to really express different aspects of the faith, and a lack of attentiveness to the history of the treatment of African Americans right in the Diocese of Richmond and the South in general, and the history of lynching that was such a terrible, horrific example of racism throughout the South. So I guess whether or not in that section it was thought about or could be emphasized that this conversation is important, not only with kind of the more standard idea of the Anglo community and African American or Hispanic, but within different ethnic groups within the parishes, and the importance of that being highlighted as well.
Thank you. You could certainly make that amendment suggesting some language, and we'd be very glad to look at that.
Bishop Estevez, followed by Bishop Coyne.
I really commend the committee for the very, very fine work on a very relevant issue. And now, will we have the text, the final text, because there are a lot of amendments, so the text must have been quite modified. Will we have a chance to see the total product before voting it?
The text that you have and the amendments accepted by the committee, the modifications accepted by the committee are there on the table. My understanding is that tomorrow the amendments, both accepted or not accepted by the committee, would also be provided. So you should have an idea. You won't have a complete text, but you should have an idea of what the text will look like.
Bishop Coyne, followed by Bishop Silva.
Thank you. This is a question directed at how we're going to roll out this very excellent document, and I know your staff has already been doing a lot of work on it. I have questions always about presentation across multiple platforms. If we do this great work, let's get it out there. Multiple formats, the use of digital media involving short videos as well as our digital media platforms, the creation of educated units for use in our schools and our parishes, for our adult education. We've in the past, we're getting better at it, but we still write these great documents and then we print them and they sit on a shelf. Right. And that's not the way our people engage us anymore.
Right. Yes, we are working on that. That is the purview of the ad hoc committee. We do have ready to go lesson plans for kindergarten through high school. We have fact sheets. We have information that is just waiting for the pastoral letter to be approved, and we will be adding to that. So we do have some things ready to push out right after the text is approved, and we will be adding to those in the ways in which you mentioned. Thank you.
Also, it will be a summary or a shorter version of the document, so it will be easier for people to digest the whole content. And also the ad hoc committee will continue enforcing the concrete actions that might be taken in the future regarding this document.
Bishop Silva, followed by Bishop Guillory.
Thank you. I really think the pastoral is needed from a macro point of view because it really talks about the gross expressions of racism, which obviously are present in our country and need to be addressed. However, I was a little disappointed that it doesn't go into some of the micro expressions of racism that perhaps don't even rise to the level of sin, but certainly are not things that are going to bring us together. Having worked in several multicultural parishes, I have seen, for example, in an African American community that was very that put down the Hispanic community and treated them like second-class citizens. In fact, I brought that up to one of the African American leaders, and he said, well, I can't be racist because I'm black. Well, anybody can be a racist that has a race. I have experience of an Asian community that was very hostile to the Hispanic community in the parish. And I think that certainly was a scandal to many of the people there. I had another parish where the parish leadership said that they wanted to include the Hispanics in the leadership of the parish, but they just didn't get the fact that the parish council meeting during the Spanish Mass was a problem of not including Hispanics. So I think there are kind of grassroots expressions of racism that need to be addressed, not just the macro issues, which certainly do need to be addressed. And I would hope that perhaps even with sidebars or stories like these, that those might be incorporated into the document.
Yes, thank you. I think the very basis of the document is that to not see anyone as created in the image and likeness of God, to look down upon someone and refuse to see their basic humanity, you know, we are called to reflect upon that. I think that is at the very, very heart of the document and what is at the basis of teaching it. It refers to racism as a life issue, again, lifting up human dignity and all that is a part of our lives. So that would be at the very basis of it. And it does invite each and every person to look into their own heart and to reflect from that perspective. Do I see in each and every person a reflection of the image of God? But also that would be an opportunity, you know, bishops could produce further resources in their dioceses after the letter is promulgated, and may certainly go into some of those things. Also, staff has told me we do have a complete document, including the modifications at the table. If you'd like a copy of that, we'd be glad to provide that to you.
Bishop Guillory, followed by Bishop Zurich.
Thank you for your good and needed work. In terms of the last conversation, you know, we are privileged to have a multicultural church, universal church, and our parishes made up of different ethnic and racial groups and cultures. And I think that gives us a wonderful opportunity to educate, to convert, because in a sense we have a given audience. The other thing I wanted to bring out was, I know you raise up the African American community, the Hispanics, and others, but have you given consideration to our Jewish brothers and sisters, especially in light of the past few months, the killings, burning of synagogue, etc.?
There will be documents available, one of the resource documents, and one of them is with regard to anti-Semitism. And I do believe in the document at one point anti-Semitism is mentioned. But there will be other documents coming out from the ad hoc committee, and one of those documents will be on anti-Semitism.
Bishop Zurich?
Ramirez after him. Bishop Ramirez after him. Where's Zurich?
Bishop Zurich?
No, Ramirez. Let's go to Ramirez.
Bishop Ramirez?
A very timely document, and I congratulate the committee for its fine work. But I wish there was a little bit mentioned, or maybe expanded a little bit on the social sin of racism. I refer to a theologian who says this about social sin. Personal sin is freely chosen, and I think this document seems to lean in favor of personal sin of racism. The theologian goes and says more, he says, social sin is collective blindness. There is sin as deed and sin as illness. Social sin resides within a group or a community of people. It exists without any structure. within any structure in society that oppresses human beings, violates human dignity, stifles freedom, and or imposes great iniquity. In other words, it's a pervasive illness that runs through a culture or any society. And I think we should mention at least something about social sin. Maybe it's in there, but maybe at my old age I'm missing stuff.
Thank you, Bishop. You know, the document looks at racism broadly, and what you are mentioning is in there. It's in there as institutional and structural racism. So it is in the document under those two terms.
Also, we find in the document, throughout the document, that not only to use the word sin or the concept of sin individually or structurally, but also evil. And that is a wider way to look at it.
Thank you, brothers. This will be debated tomorrow and voted on tomorrow. Yes, Bishop Bob, do you have something further to add? Okay. So we want to thank you all very, very much for your presentation. May I also add that for the ad hoc committee against racism, as you know, at first the chair was Bishop Murray. Bishop Sheldon came in gladly, but when Bishop Murray got sick, so we want to thank Bishop Murray, too, for his work at the beginning of this ad hoc committee. Thank you all. We'll see you tomorrow.
Amendments are due at 6 p.m.
I'm sorry?
Amendments are due at 6 p.m.
As always, in these action items, amendments are due at 6 p.m. No, we do it. Okay. We now turn, brothers, to the introduction of the 4 items related to the response to the crisis, the sexual abuse crisis. The first item is merely informational, and the other 3 are for discussion only. They all can be amended in any way. These 4 items are the product of a process of deliberation that began in July and has involved a fair number of bishops, priests, deacons, and lay experts. Since July, the Executive Committee, which consists of elected officers of the conference and is charged with carrying on urgent business between plenary sessions, has met 5 times. The Administrative Committee, which counts 37 members, composed of elected chairs, elected regional representatives, and elected officers, has met 3 times. There have been consultations with the National Review Board and the National Advisory Council, as well as other lay experts. 3 committees in particular, Clergy, Consecrated Life and Vocations, Child and Youth Protection, and Canonical Affairs and Church Governance, have also been meeting regularly and have worked extensively on these items. All these deliberations benefited greatly from the many letters and calls we have received from concerned Catholics. Let me take this opportunity to thank all of those who have contacted us, and they are many. The 4 items are, number 1, a third-party reporting system. Number 2, standards of accountability for bishops. Number 3, a lay commission for the investigation of complaints against bishops. And number 4, a protocol for restrictions on removed or resigned bishops. These items together address 2 gaps that have been identified in the Charter. The first gap was that the Charter does not apply to bishops. The second gap was the lack of inclusion of offenses against adults and the mismanagement of allegations by bishops. The proposals in front of you attempt to fill these gaps to the fullest extent of our authority as U.S. bishops. They are meant not to infringe in any way on the prerogatives of the Holy See or of an individual bishop. During our discussions, we can amend these or propose altogether different options. The first item on our agenda for discussion is the third-party reporting system. This is an ethics hotline. It receives complaints by phone or online. It then passes the complaint on to the appropriate authority. As it is envisioned now, that would be the Lay Commission. But there are other options we might consider as well. The third-party system is also confidential and independent. Archbishop Gomez will present this item to you shortly. The next item for discussion after that is called the Standards of Accountability for Bishops. The text presents standards of conduct that apply only to bishops. The standards address 3 types of misconduct: sexual abuse of minors, sexual harassment of and misconduct with adults, and the failure to address such allegations properly. These standards would be used as a filter for the third-party reporting system in determining whether a complaint should go further. In other words, not every complaint against a bishop for any reason will go through the third-party reporting system, only those that violate these standards. Cardinal Tobin will present this item to you. The next discussion item is the Lay Commission. As it is presented in the documentation, once a complaint is received by the third-party system, it would be forwarded to the Lay Commission. The purpose of this Lay Commission is to investigate complaints and make a report to the nunciature. What you have before you is not a completed proposal. Many of the Commission's details require further input and deeper analysis. Consultation has been ongoing with laity, other experts, and bishops. Our discussion today is meant to improve the concept with your further input. In addition, continued consultation with clergy and laity, in particular with the National Advisory Council and the National Review Board, is essential. We also anticipate consultation with the Holy See in connection with the February meeting. Archbishop Vigneron will present that discussion item to you. The last discussion item is a protocol for bishops who are removed, retired, or resigned for sexual abuse of minors, sexual harassment of and misconduct with adults, and the failure to address such allegations properly. The protocol would only apply after action by the Holy See. As currently drafted, the protocol describes actions that lie within the existing authority of the local bishop. They also include a provision regarding participation in the USCCB meetings. Bishop Deely will present this discussion item. We will devote time to the 4 items today as they are presented and continue our conversation tomorrow based on the amendments which you submit on the 3 discussion items by 6 p.m. today. Let me now invite Archbishop Gomez to introduce our 1 information item on the crisis. Information item: the third-party reporting system. Thanks, Archbishop Gomez.
Thank you, Cardinal DiNardo. Good afternoon, brothers.
We're on schedule.
Cardinal DiNardo has given us an overview of the system we are discussing. As we have heard, this system has 4 main elements. What I would like to do now is to discuss just one of those elements, the third-party reporting system. And you received some information on this specific issue on the supplementary document number 1 information. And also have PowerPoint, so that might be helpful to you all. Unlike the other elements we are proposing today, the third-party reporting system has already been approved. The decision was made by the Administrative Committee in September. My purpose here is to explain some more details about this system. This is an information item. It is not an action item requiring your vote. To begin, with this new system, we are trying to address a problem that some people have. The problem is this. Right now, they have no clear avenue to report allegations or complaints against bishops. With the 2002 Charter, we don't have a clear avenue for the faithful to make complaints against priests or deacons for the sexual abuse of a minor. As we know, these complaints are to be made through the local diocesan victim assistance coordinator. But in light of recent events, we are now talking about complaints against bishops. Complaints against a bishop might include not only abuse of a minor, but also sexual harassment or other misconduct involving adults, or also the bishop's failure to respond adequately to abuse or misconduct complaints. The practical issue is this. If the faithful send their complaints about a bishop to a diocese, understandably, they are concerned about how that complaint might be handled. Some people may think to complain or decide to complain to the police or to civil authorities. And we certainly encourage them to do this when the complaint involves sexual abuse of a minor, regardless of whether the allegation involves a priest, deacon, or bishop, or anyone at all. But in cases where the complaint does not involve a crime, such as a complaint of sexual harassment involving an adult, civil authorities do not usually receive such complaints. Then, some people might think that they should go to the Pope directly, but most of the time, they wouldn't know how to reach him. Another option for people is the nunciature. They may think that that's the right place to complain. But again, most people probably do not know how to reach the nunciature. So with this new third-party reporting mechanism, we are trying to address these issues and provide greater clarity for our people. We are not replacing or changing our existing process or avenues for making a complaint. What we are doing is enhancing our current procedures with the aim of making the whole process more effective for our people. We believe this new process will help our people to know where they can submit their complaints. This will increase transparency and ensure that their complaints are received and treated with the seriousness that they deserve from both church authorities and civil authorities. The new process we have settled involves a third-party ethics hotline system that will be accessible by phone or internet. As we know, many for-profit and non-profit organizations have established hotlines like this, including many Catholic dioceses. In these organizations, the hotline field a wide range of complaints, including complaints of sexual harassment or other kinds of misconduct. These systems provide for confidential reporting. When complaints are received, they are directed to a compliance officer or another official designated by the organization. These systems also provide accountability, giving the person who files the complaint a tracking number that allows them to track the status of their complaint. It is important to keep in mind These third-party systems have no role in investigating or evaluating complaints. They are designed to provide an effective way for people to make complaints and for the organization to gather information confidentially to be turned over to the appropriate investigators. So the system we are planning to establish will be customized to meet our unique needs. Our system will only receive complaints about bishops, and our system will only receive complaints about areas addressed in our new standards of accountability for bishops. So that means this. Our system will receive three kinds of complaints. First, those involving allegations that a bishop has sexually abused a minor. Second, that a bishop has committed sexual harassment or other sexual misconduct against an adult. Third, and finally, we will receive complaints that the bishop has failed to respond adequately to claims of sexual abuse, harassment, or misconduct by others. Or other kinds of complaints will be screened out. This third-party system was approved by the Administrative Committee in September, but has not been implemented yet. This is because the original idea was to send complaints to the Special Commission. As you know, we will be discussing this commission later in the meeting, but we will not be voting on it. We may also wish to consider other places where complaints might go. So some final details about the reporting system. We will have a dedicated toll-free number, and we will have live operators available to receive complaints in either Spanish or English. We will also have a single internet link that will have the capacity to receive online complaints also in Spanish or English. We will arrange for dioceses to get the technical support they may need to make the link to this system available on their own websites. So, when the time comes to launch the system, the conference will provide you and your diocese additional resources so that you can help your people to be aware of the new system and give them access to it. So thank you for your attention. And at this time, I will take your questions.
We'll take one or two questions, brothers. We're getting close to lunchtime, and it'd probably be fresh in our minds if we started most of it after lunch, but we'll take a couple questions now.
Cardinal Cupich.
Cardinal Cupich?
Thank you. Thank you, Archbishop, for your work and explanation today. I would just want to make sure that everyone recalls that in 2002, we made a statement of episcopal commitment, and it reads in part, in cases of allegations of sexual abuse of minors by bishops, we will apply the requirements of the Charter also to ourselves, respecting always church laws that applies to bishops. In such cases, a metropolitan will be informed when an allegation has been made against a bishop. The senior suffragan bishop will be informed when an allegation has been made against a metropolitan. So I think it's important to remember that we have this commitment already in place. And I don't, not to quibble with this provision here, but to call us once again to that kind of responsibility. And it was, in fact, this provision that was triggered by Cardinal Dolan in the case of McCarrick. He followed this. He did his job. And it's an opportunity for us to remember the commitment we made 16 years ago to apply the requirements of the Charter to ourselves. We hear sometimes that we were not included in the Charter, maybe not in the Charter itself, but we committed ourselves to apply the requirements of the Charter to ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Cardinal.
Bishop Hartmeyer, followed by Archbishop Jacobs.
Archbishop, once again, thank you for your work on this project. I just have a question about from whom would you take these complaints, or from whom would the third party take the complaints? Would they take the complaints only from the victim, or would they take them from a parent or a teacher or an attorney? From whom will they take these complaints to the third party?
The plan right now is to take it for anybody.
So anyone can call in the complaint about someone else who may have been a victim?
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Archbishop Jacobs.
Archbishop Jacobs, followed by Bishop DiMarzio.
I just want to second the notion of perhaps using the Metropolitan or the Nuncio's office for such complaints or allegations. We're going to have to publicize this toll-free number. Why not publicize the contact information for the Nuncio's office or the Metropolitan? And part of it is that, well, it's already stipulated, and there is a question of costs, and it's not clear where that money is coming from. And as I've stated before, we're a poor rural archdiocese on the plains of Iowa, and there's going to be a lot of monetary calls or claims on our resources with regard to other procedures and ways of going forward in this whole area.
Thank you. Yeah, I think right now the documentation that we have calls for the information go to the commission, but that might be another option to send the information to the archbishop, to the head of the province. Or that's the way it is right now, but obviously we need to study what is the best way to do it. Then also regarding the price, we have the first estimate, the cost is about $8,500 per year, plus $2,500 just for the beginning of the system.
Bishop DiMarzio.
I'm concerned that we have to deal with anonymous complaints. Are we going to take them? One of the things we've learned from our own reporting line is that the people are informed as they call that all of these complaints will be given to law enforcement. So I think if it's appropriate. So I think that's one way to deal with it. But are we going to take anonymous complaints? That has to be decided and thought about.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Archbishop Cordileone, and followed by Bishop Troutman.
Bishop DiMarzio just asked my question, so I understood they will receive anonymous complaints and follow the usual process. Is that correct?
Momentino.
Sooner or later, they need to disclose their identity. I mean, an anonymous complaint is not going to go anywhere, I think.
In order to do the investigation, you mean?
Right.
Bishop Troutman.
I think this proposal is very dangerous and unjust. It calls for reporting to the Apostolic Nunciature accusations not investigated, not substantiated, not proven. That's unjust.
Thank you. Is there anyone else?
Thank you, Bishop.
No one else.
No one else at this point. This will come back after lunch, I presume. With that, I think it's wiser, we have a few minutes, I think it's wiser to just break for, let's break for lunch, but there's some announcements and there's some praying we have to do, so it's always important before lunch.
Thank you.
Senator Bransfield.
Thank you, Your Eminence. Your Eminences, Your Excellencies, as a reminder, amendments are due at 6 p.m. in the trays outside this meeting room. The location for lunch is on the third floor outside of the Grand Ballroom number 5. The body of bishops will reconvene at 2 p.m. in this room for the start of the afternoon session. Thank you, Your Eminence. Oh, Bishop Soto.
Bishop Soto wants to make an announcement right now.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. I just wanted to take this moment to
express my gratitude to all of you who have expressed concern for the people of Paradise, California, who lost their town, their whole town, in a raging inferno that continues to burn, fueled by unrelenting winds. Your offers of prayer are deeply appreciated by the people of Paradise and by me. Sadly, the death toll continues to rise as they look through the rubble of the town, and there are still more than 100 people still missing and feared dead. The Camp Fire is now the most devastating fire in modern California history, both in terms of lives and property lost. So as we pray the Angelus, let us together ask for Mary's intercession so that the families of Paradise may be consoled with the mercy of her Son, Jesus. Thank you.
Thank you, Bishop Soto. We promised that. It's a terrible time in California. Any more announcements? All righty, let's pray. The Angelus.
We can pray also for the ones in Southern California. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
The angel of the Lord declared unto Mary,
She conceived by the Holy Spirit.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, blessed the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Behold the handmaid of the Lord.
Be it done unto me according to thy word.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, blessed the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
And the Word was made flesh.
And dwelt among us.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, blessed the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Pray for us, O Holy Mother of God.
That we may be made worthy of the promises of Christ.
Let us pray. Pour forth, we beseech you, O Lord, thy grace into our hearts, and we, to whom the incarnation of Christ, your Son, was made known by the message of an angel, may by his passion and cross, be brought to the glory of his resurrection. Through the same Christ our Lord. Amen. Bless us, O Lord,
and these thy gifts, which we are about to receive from thy bounty, Christ our Lord. Amen.
in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Hey, we got it through. We went on time.